The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the program. It's Monday. We are back. I'm thrilled that you are with me today. And sadly, for the beginning of the show at least, I am not joined by Lewis. There is a worldwide Skype outage going on. And of course, for the next couple of weeks, Lewis and I connecting via Skype until we are all set up in our new Boston studio. And sadly, as a result of this, Lewis not joining me for the earlier part of today's program. But the news continues nonetheless. Very, very big news with regard to the deficit. President Obama could conceivably eliminate the federal deficit altogether by 2017. Now, I know people are going to flip out and they're going to email me, and it's going to be obvious that they can't tell the difference between the debt and the deficit. So to be clear, I'm talking about the deficit. The debt is the total amount of accumulated debt that we can calculate by summing the deficits and surpluses year over year. The deficit is in one particular year the difference between revenues and expenditures, and that is what we are talking about. Obviously, we would need to have many years of surplus to eliminate the debt. I speak to you today about the deficit. And as you may know, not if you've been paying attention only to right-wing media, President Obama has reduced the annual federal budget deficit by 70% since he inherited nearly a $1.5 trillion annual deficit from George W. Bush. And we see the rate of reduction in the deficit actually starting to accelerate. And it is very possible that President Obama could reduce the annual deficit to zero for his final budget before leaving office. This would make him the first president to eliminate the federal deficit since Bill Clinton. Now, let's think about this for a second. President Obama's last annual budget will be overseen by the eventual president who will win in the 2016 election. So when we say President Obama could eliminate the deficit during his last year in office, he will not actually be in office during the entirety of that budget year. It would be during the final budget submitted and passed by the Obama administration. This is going to be very confusing for many of our right-wing viewers because George W. Bush, a so-called fiscal conservative, is known as by virtue of being a Republican as someone who should be reducing the deficit. But of course, the hugely expensive wars that George W. Bush got us involved in, as well as tax cuts for the very rich, actually exploded the deficit. President Obama, known to many on the right as the wasteful spending liberal, has actually reined in the deficit drastically. So we will continue to keep an eye on this. Very confusing news, I understand, to many right-wing nuts who pay attention to this program. I'm sure that I will be hearing from many of them, but that is the reality. President Obama reducing the deficit significantly and potentially would be able to reduce the deficit to zero altogether. Let's talk about the latest polling data after the second Republican debate. There is a new CNN ORC poll. It was conducted in the 3 days after 23 million people watched Wednesday night's Republican debate. This was the second major Republican primary debate of the 2016 election season. We knew that there was going to be some shakeup. Donald Trump and Carly Fiorina involved in a lot of back and forth. We saw all sorts of different discussions and dynamic changes, and we also saw some candidates essentially play no role in that debate whatsoever, making no impact at all. And the polling data is in, and it is fascinating. Donald Trump has dropped 8 percentage points. Now, this still keeps him in the lead. Donald Trump was polling 32% nationally in Republican primary polls, now down to 24% support. He has dropped 8 points. Carly Fiorina, on the other hand, who many felt had won the debate, has jumped way up in support from 3% earlier this month all the way up to 15%, putting her now ahead of Ben Carson's 14%. Carson's support also down from 19% in the previous poll to just 14% now. So this is very, very interesting. And what it really goes to show us is when one debate can shake up the numbers so drastically, the choices that Republican primary voters are telling pollsters are their choices are not really ingrained and solid choices. And anybody could have guessed that. We knew all along that Donald Trump's 30-something% support was not something that would ultimately hold. And we now see just a single debate totally shaking that up. We see Jeb Bush in 5th place with 9%, followed by Senator Ted Cruz and former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, each with 6%. Rand Paul, who I felt did okay in that second debate, at 4%, Chris Christie at 3%, John Kasich 2%, Rick Santorum 1%. Notice that I have not mentioned Scott Walker, who is making no impact whatsoever, polling under 0.5%. So let me restate where I think we are. Donald Trump will not be the Republican nominee. I've been saying it for months. There is no question whatsoever in my mind that Donald Trump is not going to be the Republican nominee. The last debate showed that he really knows very little, going with the Herman Cain approach of, hey, I don't really need to know that much stuff because I'm going to get the best people once I'm the president. Or in Donald Trump's case, I guess a few weeks from now, he's going to tell us a little more about who is going to be advising him. So the big takeaway here is the Donald Trump decline is starting. Trump is not going to be the nominee. The more Trump speaks in situations where he can't 100% control the circumstances, he shows that he really doesn't know anything. And I am hopeful that Trump continues to get enough support that he stays in and hopefully violates that absolutely worthless, meaningless pledge he made not to run as a third-party candidate, because Donald Trump, if he can maintain 10, 12, around there percent support, and if he did run as a third-party candidate, he could single-handedly give this election to the eventual Democratic nominee. I have crazy video of Donald Trump at a town hall rally of some kind. It doesn't matter whether you think Donald Trump is racist personally. The fact is he is the most popular candidate among racists. David Duke, former KKK Grand Giraffe, or what is he, Grand Wizard, Grand Dragon, something like that. He has come out and said Trump is the best candidate. Other white supremacist and white separatist groups have come out and said Donald Trump is the guy with his anti-immigration rhetoric. The anti-immigration crowd more broadly, the anti-Hispanic crowd, they are going towards Donald Trump. And even the anti-Semites are going in the direction of Donald Trump, in spite of the fact that his own daughter has converted to Judaism, her husband Jewish. Doesn't matter. And now we have just stunning, dumbfounding video from a rally that Trump did in Rochester, New Hampshire late last week. A Trump supporter was given the mic. Trump said, let's take some questions. First question, this guy gets up there and says, we have a problem. The problem is Muslims. How can we get rid of them? Take a look at this video.
Okay, this man, I like this guy.
From White Plains. Amen. Okay. We have a problem in this country. It's called Muslims. We know our current president is one.
Right.
You know he's not even an American.
We need this
birth
question.
certificates,
This is the first
man.
question.
But anyway, we have training camps growing where they want to kill us. Mm-hmm. That's my question. When can we get rid of
We're
them?
going to be looking at a lot of different things. And, you know, a lot of people are saying that, and a lot of people are saying that bad things are happening out there. We're going to be looking at that and plenty of other things. Okay, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
This guy squeezes out such a huge amount of lunacy in 20 seconds. Muslims are the problem. Obama's a Muslim. Obama isn't American. They want to put us in training camps and they want to kill us. This is actually a case study in how to stuff an incredible amount of lunacy into such a brief statement. I mean, this should be analyzed in English classes around the world, because it is just incredible how this guy is able to stuff so much insanity into such a short clip. Now, Trump's reaction. Trump could have like John McCain did in 2008, correct this dude. There was a woman when John McCain was running against President Obama in 2008 who said, President Obama is an Arab. And John McCain said, ma'am, no, he's not an Arab. He's a family man and he's a citizen. And I have political disagreements on some fundamental issues with him. Now, John McCain could have also said, even if he was a so-called Arab or a Muslim or whatever, that actually wouldn't disqualify him from being president. But he didn't do that. But it was still more than what Donald Trump did. Trump's answer was chilling, right? Which is, we're considering our options and we're looking into many things. No reasonable person would reply in this way unless they sympathized to some extent or they found it important to pander to people who believe that President Obama is a Muslim or that they are trying to kill us or that President Obama is not American or that Muslims, by virtue merely of being Muslims, are a problem. Trump's answer instead, we're looking at that and lots of other things. What on earth does that mean? I mean, these Donald Trump rallies are starting to look like KKK meetups. And for some reason, it's more acceptable to say this than to say, black people are a problem. The president is black. How do we get rid of black people? When it's Muslims, it's slightly more acceptable to a contingent of the Republican Party. And later on, Donald Trump did this insane sort of PR post-facto technique where he mentioned on CNN yesterday that he has friends who are Muslim. He said, quote, well, we could be politically correct if you want, but are you trying to say we don't have a problem? I think everybody would agree. I have friends that are Muslims. They're great people, amazing people. And most Muslims, like most everything, I mean, they're fabulous people, but we certainly do have a problem. And Jake Tapper from CNN said to Donald Trump, can you clarify exactly what that problem is? And Trump said, well, you have radicals that are doing things. It wasn't people from Sweden that blew up the World Trade Center, Jake. Now, anybody who watches this show knows that I am perfectly comfortable pointing to different evidence that tells us, well, what percentage of this group would be called radical, or what percentage of that group. And we know that in many Middle Eastern countries, the percentage of Muslims that hold what are extremist and radical beliefs is maybe not as low as some people would believe. But there is absolutely no question that the overwhelming predominant number of Muslims are not radical, they are not a problem, and that this comment should, by any reasonable presidential candidate, instantly be laughed off and condemned the way that John McCain sort of did, I guess, back in 2008. And as telling as the question is about who supports Donald Trump's answer is even more damning in terms of either what he believes or who he's trying to pander to. In either case, absolutely disgusting, shocking video. And as I mentioned earlier, the Donald Trump decline is beginning, already losing 8 points of support since last week's Republican debate, and it is absolutely going to continue. Let's take a break. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpackman. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by our audience through something called membership. Today's new member of the day is Catherine Chant. Catherine, thank you so much for being a member of our show. Catherine gets access to the bonus show and the commercial-free audio feed and the commercial-free video feed of the show, gets access to our archive of shows dating all the way back to 2005. And of course, Catherine is invited to our quarterly-ish member town halls where members get to basically just join a video conference with Lewis and me and ask us questions, etc., etc. We actually posted last week's town hall to our YouTube channel, and you can check that out. And if you'd like to sign up for membership, go to davidpakman.com/membership. We really appreciate it. Remember also that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can use the Amazon banner at davidpakman.com, and anything you buy on Amazon will send us a little kickback. It's very easy to do. You go to davidpakman.com. On the right side of the page, you'll see there is a banner that goes to Amazon. Click it, bookmark the link, use it whenever you shop, and then everything you purchase will send us a little kickback. Couple of interesting items purchased over the last week by our audience. A lot of people taking my recommendation about the Mercure safety razors that I have been trying out and purchasing those, as well as the replaceable double-edged razors. Also, somebody bought this 10-watt micro solar power charging kit, which is like a mini solar panel that you can put anywhere and then use it to charge stuff, be it your phone or laptop or whatever else. I can only assume that as the solar panel technology continues to improve, we will see more and more of these types of things. And it's very, very cool to see that these are now available on Amazon. And also many people purchasing last week's guest's book. We interviewed Jonathan Tassini last week about his book, The Essential Bernie Sanders. People buying it in paperback, people buying it in Kindle form, people buying it even as an audiobook. So clearly, I think we can say that there is an interest in what is going on with Bernie Sanders among many in our audience. I have a really disturbing clip of presidential candidate Ben Carson. Now, last week I referred to him as second place candidate Ben Carson. He has, since last week's Republican debate, dropped from second place to third place, just behind Carly Fiorina. He was asked to comment on Donald Trump's town hall insanity. So earlier in the show, I played for you this clip of a guy getting up at a Donald Trump town hall and asking a question about, we have a problem in this country. It's called Muslims. Obama's a Muslim. We've got to get them out. And Ben Carson was asked to comment on that. And he was asked whether a president's faith, whether a president's religion should matter. And I'm going to play for you what Ben Carson said, because he says that he would not vote for a Muslim for president based solely on them being Muslim. Let's take a look at this. It's incredible.
May wrap this up by finally dealing with what's been going on, Donald Trump, and I deal with a questioner that claimed that the president was Muslim. Let me ask you the question this way: should a president's faith matter? Should your faith matter to voters?
Well, I guess it depends on what that faith is. If it's inconsistent with the values and principles of America, then of course it should matter. But if it fits within the realm of America and consistent with the Constitution, no problem.
So do you believe that Islam is consistent with the Constitution?
No, I don't. I do not. I would not advocate that we put a Muslim in charge of this nation. I absolutely would not agree with that.
And would you ever consider voting for a Muslim for Congress?
Congress is a different story, but it depends on who that Muslim is and what their policies are.
Well, I guess the silver lining is at least Ben Carson would consider voting for a Muslim for Congress, not just president. Religion doesn't matter to Ben Carson unless you have the wrong religion, a particular one. In his case, he would not vote for any presidential candidate who is Muslim. So there should be no religious test in principle to hold elected office, according to Ben Carson, right? We should follow the Constitution, except when you're talking about a particular religion with a particular set of beliefs. And Bernie Sanders had such a spot-on criticism where he said, quote, "I am very disappointed that Dr. Carson would suggest that a Muslim should not become president of the United States. It took us too long to overcome the prejudice against electing a Catholic or an African-American president. People should be elected to office based on their ideas, not their religion or the color of their skin." And this anti-Muslim position resonates with a significant portion of right-wingers. That's truly the most disappointing thing. Yeah, you can get a candidate up there who has a totally insane view on what the Constitution says regarding a religious test, but ideally, having that view would completely disqualify you from consideration for president, but not when the Republican Party, I'll stop short of saying is filled with, but has a non-insignificant contingent of voters that agree with this point of view, that, yeah, freedom of religion and blah, 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 and the Constitution and all this stuff, but electing a Muslim to president? No, we're not going to do that. And let me remind you that Ben Carson is a medical doctor. He can't understand the simplest things about our Constitution. Article 6 of the Constitution says very clearly, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So we see that the religious test is completely misunderstood by right-wingers with regard to Kim Davis's bigotry and failure to do her job and follow the law as upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States. And then we see Dr. Ben Carson say, yeah, whatever faith is fine, but Muslims for president? I don't think so. So Donald Trump, when that question was asked at his rally, failing to say, what you're saying is insane. And now Dr. Ben Carson saying, well, I wouldn't vote for a Muslim for president either, but I am in favor of the Constitution. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And these two guys combined, Donald Trump and Ben Carson, now represent, according to the latest polls, 38% of the support of the Republican primary voters. 24% for Donald Trump, 14% for Ben Carson. Very, very scary stuff. Okay, I have video of Kim Davis's husband, Joe Davis, speaking at a completely lunatic rally. Joe Davis is the husband of Rowan County Clerk Kim Davis, who has been released from jail after being jailed for contempt of court for refusing to issue initially same-sex marriage licenses in Rowan County, Kentucky, and ultimately any marriage licenses whatsoever after the historic Supreme Court ruling around state same-sex marriage bans. And he showed up and he said, people need to pray for my wife, people need to pray for me, and that it is all about standing with God here. Of course, this is Kim Davis's fourth husband, certainly not what Kim Davis's Christian religion would dictate is appropriate. How he explains that, we don't know, because he doesn't. Here's the audio of Joe Davis, Kim Davis's husband, maybe even crazier than she is.
Well, I'm not a speaker, but I just want to tell y'all, I really, truly appreciate and love each and every one that's here today to show the support for God first, and for me and my wife. I love each and every one of you. I love Tennessee. I love everybody. Y'all just keep praying for me and my wife that God will give us the strength to fight this battle until it's over with. God bless you all.
Yeah. Remember Joe the plumber? This is like Joe the dumber or something like that. I mean, support for God. You're her fourth husband. How is that support for God under the same sort of the same umbrella that Kim Davis is using to reject same-sex marriage licenses in Rowan County? God will give him the strength to fight this battle until it's over. You would think that if God were not a hypocrite, he would say, I'm not going to support you in this battle because you've been married 4 times, and that's just as much a violation of my doctrine as is your belief that I am anti-gay. And I love how Joe Davis ends by saying, God bless you all. Yeah, God bless you all unless you're gay, in which case you should be discriminated against as a matter of the law and likely burn in hell for all of eternity. Oh, and I'm married 4 times, but we're going to ignore that. The audacity to show up and tout God when you're just as much in violation of God's supposed law as the people whose lives your wife is trying to, whose lives your wife is trying to ruin, essentially, unsuccessfully, by and large, fortunately. Some of the other cast of characters appearing at this insane rally, Rafael Cruz, the father of Ted Cruz, who is a presidential candidate, Dr. Richard Land, and Bishop E.W. Jackson, all people that I would not want to have the least bit of association with, but seemingly not everybody feels that way. Joe Davis, we now see the fourth husband of Bigot County Clerk Kim Davis. Later on in the show, it turns out that Kim Davis may already have violated the rules placed by Judge Bunning, who released her from jail where she was held for contempt. She may have already broken those rules and may be headed back to jail. We'll talk about that after the interview, which is coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Dr. Lance Liotta, who's professor and co-director of the Center for Applied Proteomics and Molecular Medicine and medical director for the certified CAP CLIA laboratory. We're going to talk about some of Dr. Liotta's research into individualized cancer therapies, but we'll start a little bit with the context of cancer today. You know, Dr. Liotta, I don't think I know many people who have not in some way been touched by cancer, either directly or by someone they know. And a common refrain is that cancer is more common than ever. Is that true in the sense that we are seeing an increased rate of cancer, or do we have to consider that longer life expectancy and having cures for other conditions that people used to die for are allowing people to live long enough to eventually get cancer?
Very good question. In 1971, when Richard Nixon declared the war on cancer, we thought curing cancer was straightforward, like going to the moon. But we didn't realize how tremendously difficult it is to cure cancer. And only now are we finally understanding how cancer works. So we were very hopeful about the future. But at the moment, there's an ever-increasing burden of cancer on society. More people are dying of cancer every year. That's balanced off a little bit by the enlarging population and the longer lifespan, but it's about 1/4 of the population will die of cancer. We are optimistic, though. We have hope because there is some evidence that we can extend life several years for many of the major types of cancer. It doesn't work as well if the cancer is advanced, but for the early stage cancer, we've been making advances on extending life. And overall, with the enormous progress in understanding how cancer works, we are very optimistic about the future. And I could tell you about some of the really exciting advances in cancer research that give us very great hope for the future.
Yeah, and I do want to get to that, but so is there a simple answer to, adjusted for the fact that we have the largest population on this planet that we've ever had, and the reality that people are living longer, what can we really say about the rate and prevalence of cancer?
Is increasing slightly, not dramatically, but it is increasing slightly, and for all the major cancers, some more than others, and the trouble is that we can't be exactly sure about that answer because some of the statistics that we're looking at were collected many years ago. We don't have all the up-to-date statistics. But more or less, cancer is increasing slightly in all the major kinds of cancer, and that is somewhat balanced off by those other factors that you mentioned. But doesn't, we're not looking to reduce the cancer a little bit. We want to have a dramatic reduction in the incidence of cancer. And right now it's a terrible burden on society. So in fact, if you look at it that way, we are losing the war on cancer in terms of not making a major reduction in the number of cancer deaths.
And or let me say it a different way, is there a consensus among the medical community as to why we are seeing this increase in the rate of cancer? Has it been pinpointed to something environmental or any sort of specific aggravating factor?
Well, it's a combination of factors. We know certain carcinogens, such as smoking, cause cancer, but the effects of that smoking isn't realized till 10, 20 years later and just emerging now. So the rate of lung cancer is continuing to increase, and it's increasing at a faster rate in women, and may be related to smoking or to secondhand smoke. But there is an environmental cause. In other types of cancer, such as breast cancer, it might be a combination of hormonal therapy that was been used in treating menopause, which that is reduced now in terms of standard of care. So there might be a slight reduction in incidence of breast cancer due to that. Nevertheless, breast cancer continues to be a severe problem. And for prostate cancer, it has a lot to do with early diagnosis. We're picking up more cancers at an earlier stage due to PSA with prostate cancer, but that has its own problems because some of those patients may not need treatment and we're over-treating them. So it's a mixture of different effects. At the same time, we're understanding more about the genetics and heritability of cancer and cancer-prone families, and we are studying that, and we can recognize certain genetic signatures of cancer risk. That's going to be very powerful in the future. But there are still major reasons why cancer is so hard to cure. Would you like me to tell you what those reasons are?
Yes, but let me get one other question in first, and then we'll talk about why it's hard to cure. And this may be sort of tie into my next question, which is talk about some of the ways in which today's predominant treatments are in many ways not ideal, which I'm sure includes in part lack of being effective in some types of cancer, but also with regard to often affecting the entire body when trying to treat a cancer that is actually quite localized.
Yes, yes. So the principle is that cancer is a disease of self. Your own cells have gone crazy, and they're now invading their neighbors, spreading through the body and killing others in your cell population. So it's really hard to find a therapy that's specific for these cancer cells and doesn't hurt your normal cells, because they're just your normal cells essentially with a mental defect that causes them to behave in a terribly malignant way. So that's why it's hard to have a specific therapy for cancer. It's not like a virus or a bacteria that's invading your body, and that you could develop a therapy that's specific for those foreign cells, but these are your own cells that have gone crazy. That is the basic principle why it's so hard to find a therapy that kills the malignant cells but leaves the normal cells alone.
Yes. So let's dig into that a little bit. Individualized cancer therapies. Talk a little bit about how that would work. Talk about what's on the horizon and what reasons we have to be optimistic.
Yes, we have great reasons to be optimistic. So as I said, each patient's tumor is different at the molecular level, and some think that every single patient's tumor is different from every other's. They may look similar under the microscope, but they have a different constellation of genetic problems that are, or defects in the proteins or the metabolites. All different parts of the cell can contribute to the cancer malignant phenotype or malignant behavior. But now we recognize that we can map the circuitry of the cancer cell. It's like putting an ohm meter in and checking the circuit of an electronic transistor and resistor circuit, and we can see where all the protein signaling is flowing in that cancer cell. Once we get that circuit map of all the different proteins and how they're interacting to drive the cancer, make it grow, make it invade, we can then take that circuit map and individualize the therapy for that patient and say, you should get this therapy because we see that this part of your cancer circuitry is hyperactive, and if we shut that down, we can potentially block your cancer from having its ability to be malignant. We can also design therapies where we could have combinations that hit that circuitry, that map of the cancer cell at different points so that the tumor cannot deviate or detour around the therapy that we give it. Because too often, even if we know in that circuitry that there's a hyperactive point and we give a therapy for it, the tumor cell just detours around it and goes a different way, in the end still achieving its same goal of growing and invading and spreading. But if we look at that circuit map, and that's what we do in our lab. We measure the circuit map of cancer cells in patients. If we look at that circuit map, we might be able to have a combination therapy that rationally and wisely hits the circuit at different points so the tumor cell cannot detour around it. And so individualized combination therapy is the future.
Dr. Liotta, briefly, in the limited time we have left, I would love to get your sense of a timeline for the potential drastic reduction in cancer deaths. Some futurists, like Ray Kurzweil, for example, believe that within 10 to 15 years, these individualized types of therapies will be so good that we will see drastic reductions in the number of people dying from some of the major forms of cancer. What sort of timeline do you see?
It's very difficult to make predictions, and I and my predecessors and people over the past years have often predicted the next 10 years, next 15 years. But in this case, I can really say that we're optimistic that we can make dramatic improvements in the next 10 to 15 years by the combination of all these approaches that I stated. And the reason I'm hopeful is that we are making incremental but dramatic effects on individual kinds of cancer, such as melanoma, and then breast cancer, and colon cancer prevention with polypectomies. And so if we take this into the future, we can see that we're just going to get better and better. And it might be not all at once. There's not going to be one cancer cure that we can use for all types of cancer. We're going to do it one cancer type at a time.
We've been speaking with Dr. Lance Liotta, professor and co-director of the Center for Applied Proteomics and Molecular Medicine. Thank you so much for joining us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, let's get into what's going on with Kentucky clerk Kim Davis in Rowan County. Kim Davis may have compromised marriage licenses for same-sex couples, which would directly defy Judge Bunning's order when she was released from jail where she was held for contempt. An attorney for Deputy Clerk Brian Mason, who's the deputy clerk who has been doing many of the same-sex marriage licenses in Kim Davis's absence, and even since she returned to work last week, said that Kim Davis confiscated the county's original forms for married couples and replaced them with new forms that her name is conspicuously missing from. It also lacks a spot for Brian Mason to sign his own name. And Mason's attorney said Mr. Mason is concerned because he's in a difficult position that he continues to issue the licenses per the court's order, which had some remote questionable validity. So think of the position that this bigoted woman is putting her deputy clerk in. Brian Mason has a direct order from the court to issue the licenses in accordance with the law, which he is doing. At the same time, he is issuing licenses using a form of questionable validity because Kim Davis has removed her name and a place for Brian Mason to sign his name from the form. So while doing what the judge has asked in terms of the sort of broad spirit of the request, which is issue marriage licenses, he may be issuing invalid marriage licenses. Now, of course, it would be at no fault of his own, and any reasonable person would assume that Judge Bunning would understand that he was doing what he was told to do with the forms he was given, and ultimately the responsibility for those forms is not his. The American Civil Liberties Union, which is representing the couples who sued for the right to have their unions recognized, has come out and said, yeah, these forms may not comply with state law, which mandates that any marriage license issued by the authority of the county clerk has to make it evident that they were issued with that authority, meaning they have to have the county clerk's name on there. So this could be a back to jail situation for Kim Davis. Now she has essentially engaged in conspiracy with premeditated document falsification, colloquially speaking. Of course, she hasn't been charged or found guilty of that. But speaking sort of between you and I in the sort of colloquial sense, this is a very deliberate, if true, attempt to preemptively invalidate these marriage licenses. And this kind of does prove to me that this isn't really about religious beliefs. She wants to be making the rules about who gets to get married in Kentucky, because now she is not issuing the marriage licenses. Her staff is doing what the judge has said, and she has allegedly chosen to manipulate the documents in a way that may cause a legal issue. I'm guessing if you asked her, she'd say, hey, my name can't be on there. If my name is on there in any capacity, in God's view, I am condoning evil sodomy, or however she would describe it. If this really is a nation of laws, we need to figure out exactly what the legal circumstances are around what Kim Davis has apparently done, and she should absolutely be charged and prosecuted to the extent allowable by law. This is a woman who is in a position where the main thing is follow the law, and do your job, and she is doing neither of those things. Huge news breaking over the weekend that scientists have genetically modified human embryos for the first time. Many of our viewers have emailed me when we talk about organizations that are trying to get permission to modify human embryos genetically. I get emails saying, David, this is inevitable. This is going to happen sooner or later, either on the record or off the record. And Chinese scientists have now edited the genome of a human embryo. Their work was published late last week in a not very well-known journal called Protein and Cell. And this is really, really big news in two ways. Number one, it's big news because this is the first time that this has been done. It is also big news because it has confirmed for us that it is not going to be some immediate, overwhelming success to try to modify human embryos to prevent certain diseases. This particular experiment done by the Chinese team was meant to find and edit the gene responsible for thalassemia, which is an inherited blood disorder which can lead to severe anemia. And they did not have a huge success rate in doing this. The researchers started with 86 embryos that were unlikely to ever develop successfully in the first place. 71 of those embryos made it to the end of the study. Of those, 54 were tested, and the team discovered that only 28 of those had been successfully modified. And even further, some of those 28 had experienced mutations that were not intended to happen and also would not have been able to successfully develop because of the new problems that were caused by the modification that was done. So a lot of controversy over this. There is a group of stem cell researchers in the UK which has also applied for permission to genetically modify human embryos. And the way I feel about this is we are dealing with embryos here that are unlikely, almost guaranteed, never to successfully develop into a viable fetus, a viable human. And with that, I have absolutely no problem in doing research. And at the same time, I recognize that this is research that is going to take a long time to develop successfully. As we see from these early trials, there's no easy path here to saying, oh yeah, we're going to start doing this, and in 5 years, we'll be able to easily and precisely and reliably fix predisposition to certain diseases. This is going to be a very long path. And the last thing I want as someone who is pro-science and against allowing religious dogma to interfere with science, the last thing that I want is religion and religious conservatism getting in the way of what is already going to be a difficult path towards medical advancement. So I think that this is huge news, and I am of the position that we should be creating the legal structure so that this type of work can be done in the open, documented in the open, so that science can build on itself the way that the scientific method works. If you disagree about doing this for non-religious reasons. If you disagree for religious reasons, I sort of already understand that. If you disagree with doing this type of research on non-viable human embryos for non-religious reasons, please write to us. Go to davidpakman.com and click on Contact Us and let me know what your opposition is based on, and we'll do a follow-up and we'll call it non-religious opposition to embryo genetic modification research, whatever, and we'll discuss those reasons. I'm very interested to hear from you. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail I received over the weekend. Take a listen.
Hey, David. I'm reading through the comments here on your Ann Coulter slams Republicans on Israel video.
Right.
And it's just disgusting. These people are calling you a fake liberal for supporting a free country that's defending itself only against these terrorists who are trying to impose a dictatorship, a theocratic regime.
Yeah, listen, you don't have to convince me. I have never understood how it is that so-called liberals can be on the fundamentalist, anti-progressive side when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Some of our audience disagrees with me. Increasingly, much of our audience is in agreement. They are seeing how my position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is informed by being a progressive, not in spite of being a progressive. And later this week, we're actually going to have several more examples of this, and unless things get shuffled by breaking news, but that's my plan. So I completely agree with you. You don't have to convince me. I, quite frankly, don't understand what's going on. And Dave Rubin and I have spoken about this, and you can check out his comments on the topic. Huge bonus show today. davidpakman.com/membership is how you sign up.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.